What's going on, YouTube? In today's video, I'm going to be covering a product that has not got a lot of attention online, particularly here on YouTube, since its commercial release, and that is the Sig SURG, or Suppressed Upper Receiver Group. Now, I believe that this hasn't got a lot of attention for a couple of main reasons, one being that it is limited availability. SIG only released so many of these kits on the commercial market, because this is actually the exact same kit that is being currently delivered to USSOCOM. They're just pulling some of them off of the same assembly line and packaging them and selling them for civilian sale. The other reason that this hasn't got a lot of attention is they're very expensive. These are somewhat cost prohibitive for most folks, and there's not really a great argument for it being worth it aside from the collector value and potential future resale value with these kits being very limited. But I just wanted to take the chance to show you guys how these kits work and their features and the basic idea of a Surge, since I am lucky enough to have one in my possession. So getting into it, the Surge started out back in around 2016 with a solicitation from USSOCOM for a 5.56 upper receiver that had to meet a number of different requirements in terms of length, weight. It had to incorporate some kind of suppressor shield or shroud that prevented it from burning the operator whenever it was hot. And it had very strict performance requirements for both the suppressor as well as the accuracy of the system. So long story short, it actually took 3 tries, 3 different test sessions for each of the main 3 competitors involved, that being Sig SURG, LMT, and LaRue. It took 3 tries for them to pick a winner because the testing requirements were actually so stringent that it took multiple iterations for each company to come up with something that could pass the testing. Ultimately, Sig SURG was awarded a $49 million contract, which was later extended for the suppressed upper receiver group for the M4A1 weapon. Now, as I mentioned, this is a upper receiver group for the existing inventory of M4s, so similar to the Sig SURG Rattler upper conversion kit, which I covered in a previous video that you should definitely check out. This was not a solicitation for a complete weapon system. This just had to be a drop-in upper that was compatible with USSOCOM's existing inventory of M4 lowers. So I just so happen to have a FN-marked M4 profile lower, which I've done my best to make it replicate what would currently be in USSOCOM's inventory. I've added a UID label from Carolina Laser Works, so shout out to him. I've always had a very positive experience ordering from him. My understanding is that Carolina Laser Works gets their UID label blanks from the same source that the US military does, so these are pretty much as correct as you can get. Of course, you can choose the data that goes on here. In my case, I've got the manufacturer code or the cage code, the part number for the M4A1, and the serial number for my lower. And then I've added the property of US government markings and the FN football logo as it's known. But other than that, just a standard M4 lower. I do have this equipped with a Geisley SSA trigger, which I will actually cover some compatibility issues that you'll run into with MCX platforms when running non-mil-spec AR triggers. Lastly, I'm not going to get into the actual requirements for the Surge program themselves because they're pretty extensive. I will, however, link an article from soldiersystems.net down in the comments where you can check those out. Essentially, the testing requirements were just very strict and very hard for any weapon system to pass. And USSOCOM kind of challenged the industry because while they gave minimum requirements in order for a weapon system to pass, such as the weapon can't weigh more than 7 pounds, they preferred a weight that was at 4.5 pounds. So I would call that kind of blindly optimistic. 4.5 pounds for a military style rifle would be crazy light, and would likely be sacrificing a lot of durability in the process. So most people guessed it was going to land somewhere closer to that 7-pound maximum. But again, I'm not going to delve too far into the details because that could be a video all on its own. But definitely go check that out. So getting into it, how does a Surge install onto a standard M4 lower? Well, it's not quite as simple as just popping out the takedown pins and slapping it on. There's actually some stuff you have to deal with the stock assembly. And something else I should mention is yesterday I uploaded an ASMR style video installing this kit onto my lower. So if you don't want to hear me talking or explaining each part in detail, if you just want to see it get installed, go check that out. I'll link that down in the description. But getting into it, the kit has just a few main components. So of course you have the upper itself, which I will cover shortly. We have the 1913 stock adapter, and then some of your smaller components to install everything, as well as the stock the kit comes with. And it actually comes with a second handguard, which I'll explain the purpose of this later in the video. So starting off, we're going to go ahead and prepare our M4 lower. I have already loosened the castle nut just so I can do this on camera, but of course, if you already have a buffer tube attached, like USSOCOM would on their lowers, then you'll need to loosen this with a armorer's wrench. But I'll start off removing the buffer and buffer spring assembly. Then I'll go ahead and take off the stock. And then removing the buffer tube assembly, you kind of need two hands for this, but just going to loosen the castle nut, pull back on the sling plate, and you'll see that actually exposes our detent spring for our rear takedown pin. So being very careful not to lose that. We're now going to hold down on the detent and just spin this off. Okay, with that off, we can let go of the detent and remove that along with its spring. And the lower is now ready to accept the stock adapter. We'll set these aside so they don't get lost. So the stock adapter is three main components. You have the actual stock, the 1913 rail section, as well as the components that it attaches with. And of course I have already installed all this on the gun once previously. That's why there's already anti-seize on these threads. But just for the purpose of the video and explaining things, I'm going to do this again. So you're going to thread this in just like your buffer tube. It's going to go in exactly the same manner. And it has these wrench flats back here. You're just going to grab onto these and just snug it down. It doesn't need to be crazy tight, but you want it to be tight enough that it's not going to come loose. And then next up, you can slide on your stock adapter. And of course, being careful to not kink that spring, because of course that's still exposed. And then lastly, you're just going to drop the buffer with its screw down into that hole. And I'm going to apply some Loctite to this really quick. I recommend some blue Loctite. Okay, so I have applied some blue Loctite to this little rubber buffer and screw. And we're just going to drop that in there and kind of fish it into its hole. And then using a T27 Torx, we will tighten that down. And this will be a little easier if I take the magazine out. So I couldn't find a torque spec for this online. Most people are saying just snug it down and it shouldn't go anywhere, especially with that Loctite applied. So there we have it. Your stock adapter is now attached, which means we can move on to attaching our stock. This is the Sig SURG Virtus standard folding and telescoping stock. Of course, that's something I should cover, is that this kit is based on the Sig Virtus, even though it kind of has the appearance of the newer Sig Spear line with the coyote color. And in fact, the handguard looks extremely similar to what comes on the Sig Spear, but this is actually based on the Virtus, so keep that in mind. That'll be important later. But this FDE Virtus stock which actually has anodized components. This is exclusive to the Surge kit. You can buy an FDE stock, but it'll have black components as far as the tube that it rides on and the hinge hardware. So kind of a neat aspect of this is you get exactly what USSOCOM is getting. And USSOCOM specified that this kit had to be Coyote 498 in color. So they were very specific with what color they wanted it to be for whatever reason. But using the same T27, we can tighten the stock down. And our lower is now ready to accept the upper. So pulling out the upper, this is, like I said, essentially a Sig Virtus upper receiver with a very unique suppressor design on here. And you have a UID, or a data matrix with some info there. Again, that's exclusive to the Surge. And now this will clip onto your M4 lower, just like a standard upper. And there you have it. So last couple things I'll cover. First off, the trigger compatibility, which I touched on earlier. So there are a few different variants of the MCX bolt carrier group. So this one is based on the Virtus, but unlike the commercial Virtus, this comes with a firing pin latch with a little A marked on it. There are 3 different variants of this latch. The A means it's for mil-spec bolt carrier, or for fire control groups, rather. There's an S version, which means it's made for Sig Sauer's own hammer profile for their fire control group. And then there's a G latch, which I have en route, but the G latch will be necessary to run a Geisley trigger. So as of right now, if I want to fire this gun without my G latch, I would either have to modify or completely remove this firing pin latch. And the purpose of that firing pin latch is as the hammer comes up and strikes the primer, it will push that out of the way and allow the firing pin to move forward. There's a similar mechanism on the HK416 and HK417. It's to prevent slam fires, which hasn't really been an issue on these guns since the Legacy MCX, the Gen 1, if you want to call it that. But that was an added safety feature that they incorporated halfway through the first generation. And I would like to keep that safety feature because it doesn't really hurt anything by being there. And I was able to find a G-marked latch online that was readily available. So I do have that en route, it's just not here yet. Something else to mention. So this little piece, that is the end of your recoil spring assembly. This is actually different as well from what's on the standard MCX. So because of the way it interfaces with our stock adapter, this is actually a different length on the commercial MCX. And so this piece will actually prevent you from mounting this upper onto a standard MCX lower. So if you already have an MCX lower and you want to mount this piece, you just need to swap out that recoil spring end plate for a standard MCX one, and then it will work. And so finally getting into the front end of the gun, I did mention there are 2 different handguards for this, and I will explain the purpose of that. So this is the alternate handguard that comes with the kit. And as you can see, it's much slimmer than the one that comes installed on it. So my best guess as to why they include both of these is so that, because a lot of people online are saying that, well, the fatter handguard will increase cooling and, you know, it has a heat shield built in, so it has to be wider to incorporate that heat shield. I personally think it has more so to do with the fact that the suppressor shield, if you're using the skinny handguard but also using the suppressor shroud, then the suppressor shroud can actually block accessories like flashlights or IR illuminators and things like that. If you're using the fat handguard, it actually brings accessories outwards to where they can reach around that suppressor shroud. But a lot of operators are more than likely going to hate that suppressor shroud. It's kind of big and bulky, and it's titanium, so it's still made of metal and still gets fairly hot. So I suspect a lot of them are going to switch to the skinnier, lighter handguard, and they're going to remove the suppressor shroud. So if you remove that shroud, then this just makes more sense to run. But that's my best guess. Again, there's no instruction manual, there's no owner's manual that came with this kit, so I'm just kind of guessing here. Another thing that I kind of had to just guess at, and I lucked into figuring out what these were for, there's these 3 little grub screws, which a lot of the paint has come off from installing them, but these are actually painted FDE, and there was no explanation for why these are in the kit. Well, it turns out that the way you remove the suppressor shroud is with these 3 screws right here. You remove these, and then this slides off, and then those 3 grub screws go in there just as placeholders when you're not using the shroud. So that's going to do it for the installation process of the Sig SURG. If you guys have any questions on that, leave them down in the comments section below. Don't forget to go follow me over on Instagram. I do have some plans with this kit to put it on a full auto lower that belongs to a local Type 7 FFL. And we're going to get some footage of this thing being shot full auto, because that's kind of one of the requirements for the Surge program, was that this be able to take a heavy firing schedule, including full auto fire. So I think it'd be cool to see that. If you want to see that, go follow me on Instagram, and that's where I will be posting it there. Other than that, don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you guys for watching.